Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Old School. We wanted to get everybody ready for the NBA draft tonight by taking a ride in the DeLorean and getting ready, taking a look at the Dr. J era Philadelphia 76ers, a 10-year odyssey from worst to first. So we're going to get into it and hopefully get you ready for the draft tonight. I got the usual panel to my left. I got my Uncle Mark.
Hey, everybody.
I got cousin Roger to the left over
Cousin
there.
Joe, how are you?
How you doing? And we got a special guest, my Uncle Bob.
I don't know how special it is.
Bob Sullivan, a huge huge Sixers fan. He's rocking a Matisse Thybulle jersey tonight. Could be the last time he could possibly wear that.
Oh,
Yeah, it might be the last time.
Be gone.
Yeah, Thybulle could be on the move tonight. So
If he gets traded during this podcast, I reach over to grab my maxi, put my maxi on.
there you go.
Yeah, that's the one you should have wore.
No, this
Bob
might be the
could
last.
be traded
This might be the last time I could wear this.
Yeah,
You can sell it on eBay. You can sell it on eBay for $1.
yeah.
Yeah.
Try to mail it to Canada currencies. They won't accept it.
I'll throw in my Carson Wentz jersey too, and I'll as a package deal.
Yeah, you could go to the five. You could go to the five and dime and get rid of them.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, hey, where do we begin? I mean, what an era. I mean, you talk about, they started off, in 72, 73. I mean, the Philadelphia 76ers were like the worst team in the NBA. They were coming off a trade in Wilt Chamberlain and, just total trash. I mean, you guys would know better than me. That was your era, but they must have been trashed. 9 wins.
I started following the Sixers from the day that they moved from Syracuse as the Syracuse Nationals to the Philadelphia 76ers. That was in 63.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they had an unbelievable run from then on, in particular, 67, 68, even 68 was like the high point.
Mm-hmm.
Of
That was the greatest.
team.
That was the best NBA record ever
in
that time.
in less than 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Talk about the process. This was the first process ever because they got rid of everybody
Mm-hmm.
and got nobody.
Yeah.
And by 72, 73, that season they won 9 games, and I didn't get back. I couldn't watch them, and it took till 3 years later when they got George McGinnis, Caldwell Jones, and of course the following year they got Irving in 76. That's what really got me back in the.
Yeah, I remember that season. It was painful. I mean, I went to 1 or 2 games, and they just got smoked by everybody. I mean, they set the record at 9 losses. That went on up until 2012 when Charlotte lost 7. And the process lost 10 a couple of years ago.
Yeah, they won 10. Yeah.
They won 10. I'm sorry, they won 10.
Real quick. The other thing that really put a damper on that added to that was the Eagles sucked. The Phillies were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God for the Flyers,
Right.
Yeah.
because the other 3 teams just were, again, that was like the original process, but all 3 teams, that's how bad it was.
Yeah.
Hey, Raj, weren't the Sixers games 72, 73? Weren't they on UHF a lot of times?
Oh, well, whenever they were televised, which wasn't that often.
Yeah.
They were on,
Channel 17.
I think originally they may have been on 48.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think. Because, when you're like 10 years old, like around 10 years old, I started really watching basketball on TV. I wasn't really following them, but that's my favorite team then was when Milwaukee drafted Lou Alcindor. And then they won like in 71, I think. But they won like when they drafted him, they increased by like 30 games in 1 year. Then the following year, they won the final. So I started watching it. But my first Sixers year happened to be, ironically, the 72, 73 season when they only won 9 games. That's when I started liking the Sixers, but they really sucked.
Yeah.
I think that took us down a couple times, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but who else in the history of the Sixers?
Tickets were cheap. They're giving them away.
Who else in the Sixers history probably started following the team that year? Just me.
They had I mean, the guy that everybody talked about was Fred Mad Dog Carter. He was the gunner, He got 20 points a game, and they had a guy named John Block who was their All-Star representative, and he went to the All-Star game, and then they traded him after that for a guy named Tom Van Arsdale, who had a twin brother in the league. His name was Dick Van Arsdale, and he played for the Phoenix Suns.
I met him out in Scottsdale. He has an art studio there. Him and his brother, they both are artists out there.
Yeah.
And if you go out there, in fact, they were both there. If you go out there, you can sit and they'll talk basketball with you for hours. I mean, they just hang out. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, Tom Van Arsdale originally played for the Cincinnati Royals, and then he went to the Kansas City Omaha Kings, and that's where Block went. And then Tom Van Arsdale came here. Dick Van Arsdale stayed in the West. But yeah, Tom Van Arsdale was not a bad player. It's just that he was a good scorer. He was kind of reminds me of like a Gordon Hayward type of a player, not real strong, not a good rebounder. Could shoot the outside shot.
Left-handed shooter, I believe.
He's left-handed shooter, and yeah, but that team was just pathetic. And there's a story I read. I was going to write an article for one of the websites on this 72-73 team, and I was doing some research. And they had a guy on that team. His name was John Q. Trapp. He was a bench guy from the Lakers. And what happened was they were in Detroit on the road, and that's where John Q. Trapp was from the road. I mean, from Detroit. So there's he's out on the floor, and the coach Roy Rubin, calls him over and tries to take him out of the game, and he says, "I'm not getting out of the game." And he points over to right over near the basket, under the basket. One of his buddies is sitting there, and one of his buddies sits there, and he pulls his suit jacket back, and he's packing. You know what I'm saying? So Roy Rubin left him in the game. I mean, guy had no respect at all from anybody on that team. He was like Rodney Dangerfield,
Who was the center on that 9 and 73 team for the Sixers? Because back then, I mean, you had Wilt still playing, you had Alcindor, Willis Reed. I mean, you had some good players out there. I think Wes Unseld. The shame of it is there was a lot of good teams around that era.
Oh, the Knicks, the Lakers. Oh, yeah, there were some real good teams.
Celtics. But our team was so bad, but we had so many good teams out there. Who was our center on that team?
I'll think of it.
Yeah.
I know who you mean.
I know who it is, too. It'll come to me. But anyway,
I don't know. That's why I'm asking, because
everybody came to see Freddie Carter, because he was the – and what's interesting is he had like 4 or 5 seasons where he scored 20 points a game, but he never made an All-Star game. Never.
Yeah, I was thinking Mix was on that team, but he didn't come till later. But I always remember Mix makes.
Mix came, the year later.
Yeah,
and that was who was the guy that did that sat at the dais? It was that was
Dave Zinkoff, right?
Dave Zinkoff, and then Carter.
Yeah.
Carter used to make a shot. It'd be Carter.
Yeah, right.
And when Steve Mix made one, it was always be Mix.
Makes.
Huh. And going back, speaking of Zinkoff, going back a little bit before that, when Wally Jones played for them a few years earlier, he would say, "Wally, by golly."
So I got a couple comments here. My man Pat Bernard from the Gobbler Show. You can check him out on Sunday mornings at 9. He says, "Hey fellas, good to see you guys back. What's up, Pat? How you doing?"
Yeah.
My man Chris Rapizzi, he checks into the Sully Squad all the time. Chris, well, I'll answer. Chris says, asking a current question. He says, "Who's the face of Phillies right now? Harper, Embiid, or Hurts?" I would say Embiid probably, but it kind of depends. I was going to say,
in my opinion, if you had to put a Mount Rushmore of 4 guys of the players, current players today, it would be Kelsey, Harper, Embiid, and Maxey. I think they're the most popular athletes in the city.
But if you would say 5 years from now, who's still going to be a popular, great player on his team, you might only be able to say Harper. because we don't know if Embiid's going to be around then, and all these other guys. Harper's going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
My man Paul Spencer, he does a show, 215 Cowboys show on the Out of Box Network. But he says Leroy Ellis, was that the guy's name? 773.
Yeah, he played for the Lakers, I believe. In fact, he was the center on the 73-74 team. He was the team leader in rebounds. I just didn't put a lot of the stats down from the 72-73 team because it was just bad. It was just so painful.
Yeah. So so anyway, so obviously
and then they got but the only benefit of it was they got the first round pick in 74 draft, and they got Doug Collins, best player in the country.
Yeah, but if you had to go back now and look, I never researched this. If you could take someone else besides Collins that year, was there anybody else that they should have taken, or think that was the main guy?
What do you say?
He said, if looking back on it, was do you think Collins was the right pick at number one, or was there anybody else that came out?
He was a consensus.
He was a consensus All-American. He was on the Olympic team.
Right.
He was. He was a 5 or 6 time All-Star.
I remember watching him play. I mean, he had some knee injuries. Yeah, he had injuries with his knees and stuff, but
he hurt his knee at the end, and that was it. Collins was a stud. You know?
Yeah, I never really researched that year's draft to see who else would have been there.
Yeah, so, but no, I mean, let's get into this timeline here, because like I said, I mean, we're going to get into this whole, obviously we already touched on this 72-73 season. I mean, 9 and 73. I mean, this team totally sucked.
Enough said.
Yeah, pretty much not enough said. I mean, obviously Fred Mad Dog Carter averaged 20 points a game. Forward by the name of John Block averaged 17.7 points per game. He was the team's only representative for the NBA All-Star game. They were awarded the first round pick in the 74 draft, which became Doug Collins.
Yeah.
So then we fast forward to the 73-74 season. Again, they suck, 25 and 57. But I mean, terrible season, but it is a 16-game
marked improvement.
Yeah, marked
improvement. And they brought in a new coach, Gene Shue.
Yeah, Gene Shue comes in. Key additions, you got Doug Collins was the number 1 pick in the draft, center by the name of Harvey Catchings, and then you got Steve Mix, the mayor of Mixville. Fred Carter once again leads the team in scoring at 21.4. Tom Van Arsdale, who you touched on, he averaged 19.6. Mix is 14.9. Wow, Mix had 10 rebounds a game.
Yeah.
Wasn't he about 6? How tall was Mix?
6'8".
6'8".
It's pretty good rebounding for a guy that's 6'8".
Yeah,
also a left-hander.
Yeah, not left-handed.
Okay.
The interesting thing is, in today's game, guys like him couldn't play today. I don't believe a guy like Steve Mix could play in the NBA today.
Well, he certainly didn't have speed. He had his area down in the block.
That was it.
That obviously that panned out to make him a good rebounder.
Yeah,
he was always around the basket. Even his shot, he had the baseline shot that was only about 8 to 10 feet away, but it was money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's when the power forward back then was truly a power forward. He was like a 6'8", 6'9" guy. He was burly, he banged. Guys like Dave DeBuscher and on the Portland, when we played Portland, they had
Maurice Lucas.
Right? I mean, guys like Maurice Lucas, I don't even think he could play today. He wouldn't be able to play today. And if he did, he would be a backup center.
We need a guy like him now. We could use Lucas on our team.
Yeah, all of a sudden, with the talk of PJ Tucker, however, PJ Tucker is a much better shooter than Maurice Lucas was.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Lucas didn't have an outside shot.
But all of a sudden, tough guys are talk of the
Look
day.
at that, and then you go back into the 80s, guys like Charles Oakley. He couldn't play today. Buck Williams.
Chuck
Robinson. These guys were stud power forwards. They couldn't play today. That's what I mean. I'd like the game better when it was more physical, but that's just me.
Yeah, and this my man Paul Spencer's got a comment now. Hal Greer isn't part of this particular timeline, but he has an interesting question. He just wants to know how was it watching Hal Greer in his prime prior to the 70s, late in his career. Only heard stories from my dad. How was it watching Hal Greer?
Hal Greer was
lights out. He was
a
tremendous.
Hall of Fame player.
He was a tremendous shooter.
He was a
great
shooter,
player.
great point guard. He was strong.
Yeah, he could rebound. I mean, he could defend. There was nothing he could not do. Then teams used to put the best defensive guards on him. Like whenever they would go and play Chicago, they would put Jerry Sloan on him. Jerry Sloan eventually became the coach of the Utah Jazz, the team that lost to the Chicago Bulls. Well, Jerry Sloan was always first team all NBA defense. He was one of the toughest guys in the league. And whenever Greer played Chicago, I mean, that's what his assignment was. And all the teams that had great defenders played Greer because that's how great he was.
Kind of a quirky thing with Hal Greer. At least in my recollection, he's the only player that I ever saw when he shot a foul shot. He shot a jump shot.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
And I've never, during that time or after that time, I've never seen a player actually literally take a jump shot. And he was, I'm guessing, he was
80%, 75, 80%.
He was
easy.
He was certainly
close
to 80%.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in a long time, but I remember he was. I mean, it was almost like if he went to the line, you didn't really have to worry it. You didn't have to sweat it.
He was a great player.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so obviously we're working our way down this timeline here. So 73, 74, they improve a little bit. They get to 25 wins. Here's where you got Gene Shue as the coach. So now we get to 74, 75. They have another improvement. They improved to 34 and 48. They're fourth in the NBA Atlantic Division. They got a new assistant coach by the name of Jack McMahon, and he was a real popular assistant from what I remember. Correct?
Yeah.
That in 74, 75, getting Jack McMahon
and getting Pat Williams that year.
And Pat Williams, but specifically Jack McMahon, because Jack McMahon evolved into it. He was the scout or trade maker, in addition to Pat Williams, obviously. But Jack McMahon as a scout was phenomenal, and you'll notice when we advance the calendar and go into the subsequent seasons, his decisions all panned out just about.
Well, yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I mean, like Maurice Cheeks wasn't a high draft pick. The Boston
second round pick,
right? Boston Strangler, Andrew Toney, Southwest Louisiana State, right?
Franklin Edwards,
Franklin
was a role player, but
right?
Yeah.
I mean, he found guys. I mean, obviously anybody. Ray Charles could have found Dr. J. You know what I mean? Everybody knew Dr. J.
Trading George McGinnis to get Bobby Jones. I mean, I could go on and on.
Was that George McGinnis was a hell of a scorer? So when they made that trade for Bobby Jones, was that criticized here?
I think it just raised an eyebrow too. But Bobby Jones was well established.
Mm-hmm.
It was a total reversal in philosophy from McGinnis, who rebounded, did not play great defense.
No,
and he
fouled.
Yeah,
he committed a lot of fouls.
He was lukewarm with the organization for whatever reasons.
He wasn't great in the playoffs, was he? I don't remember him being great in the playoffs.
He wasn't that bad, Bob, but he wasn't. It's not like he scored 8 to 10 points more in the postseason than he did in the preseason. But when it was Billy Cunningham's urging to make that deal for Bobby Jones.
Yeah.
And clearly that McGinnis went off to nowhere. Like he went back, I think he went back to the Pacers, as I remember.
He went to Denver, and then he got hurt, I think, and then he went to the Pacers. That's where he ended his career.
Right. And, that's as much as you can say.
In fact, I think we faced the Pacers later when I was researching, and he was on that team when we played the Pacers.
We played the Pacers a couple times,
yeah.
And we always had our way with them.
Mm-hmm.
When we were winning, again from 75, 76 on, we it was always a first round matchup between us and the Pacers, and that's because the Pacers just made the playoffs, and the other thing was it was a best of 5,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and we had no problem dispatching the Pacers in the playoffs.
Yeah. So anyway, so now we're in this 74-75 season. They win 34 games. They had one NBA All-Star, which was Steve Mix. Key off-season addition was small forward Billy Cunningham.
Yeah, he came back from the ABA.
How come? What I don't understand. How come Fred Carter leads the team in scoring every year, but he never makes the All-Star team? What was that all
That
about?
was just the way it was.
Well, you still had if I'm not mistaken, you still had Oscar Robertson
Oh yeah, you got
playing, and you had some good guards.
Earl Monroe,
Earl Monroe,
Walt Frazier.
Frazier,
So it was just a lot.
Jerry West.
Then you had Boston had like JoJo White, those types of guys. Yeah, there was just a lot of talent. Maybe JoJo White was a little bit later, but I mean, there was just the talent. You got to remember there wasn't as many teams as today.
Right.
So the talent pool is really thinned.
Okay.
Back then, I mean, it wasn't as many
It's not
teams.
to say Carter didn't deserve an appearance,
Mhm.
but
Well, and the team wasn't really good enough either. So I mean, if all things are
Right.
equal, they're
Yeah.
gonna take they're gonna take the guy from the Knicks at the time, or a team that's better than the
Celtics.
Celtics.
Earl
or,
Monroe.
yeah. So okay, so now we're now the following year, they start to really make some hay. They go 46-36. They finish second in the NBA Atlantic. With key offseason, now they make a lot of good. Here's where they made some really good offseason additions. They got Caldwell Jones as a free agent, Darryl Dawkins. I always think of him breaking, smashing the backboards. That's what I think of with Darryl Dawkins.
Chocolate Thunder.
Yeah, World B. Free.
Those two guys were drafted, and then they got Bryant. He was drafted by the Warriors, and then they brought him in, and they signed McGinnis as a free agent. And
McGinnis was a big signing.
that was a
at
big signing
at the
back
time.
then. Yeah, he had a good season. Yeah,
That was an exciting time when we got McGinnis. I remember Dad. We used to go down to quite a few games when McGinnis was there. That was exciting.
Yeah,
And-
I was at that playoff game the following season when they lost to Buffalo. But I was at that. I remember being at that playoff game. I think I was at Game 3 when they lost it.
Yeah, so we look into some of these, obviously the season leaders here now. Doug Collins looks like he's stepping into his own. Well, Doug Collins averages 20.8 points per game. You got McGinnis was 23 and 12.6 rebounds. Mix is 13.9 and 8.2 boards. Carter still averages 18.9. And Billy Cunningham, 13.7 points, 7 rebounds, 5.4 assists, injured during the season and retired as a player. So he was done as a player at this
He
point.
tore his knee up.
Yeah, he ripped his knee up big time. I mean, they probably could have. Today he would have been back playing, but I mean, the picture was on the Inquirer. There's a front page picture on the Inquirer that were 75. The Bulletin was still around. Maybe it was the Bulletin, probably both. And they show him under the court, under the basket. He's holding his knee,
Writhing in pain.
writhing in pain. And it's really so he ripped himself out. But another thing, what's interesting, like my nephew Joe just said, you look at some of those additions. I mean, aside from McGinnis, you had Caldwell Jones, Darryl Dawkins, Free, and then Bryant. I mean, all those guys were on the 76 team, and they traded Dawkins, they traded Free, and
Traded Joe Bryant.
they traded Joe Bryant down the road, and Joe Bryant trade got them. What did I say? Was it Barkley? Yeah.
Was it
Caldwell got us. Caldwell was in the Moses
I'm
deal,
trying to
right?
remember. It
Might
was,
have been-
I think Caldwell Jones was in the Moses Malone deal.
Oh, I'm sorry. Free was ultimately traded to the San Diego Clippers for that pick, and then we picked Barkley, and then later Joe Bryant. Joe Bryant was traded to the Clippers, and that pick was we used that, and that would have been Brad Daugherty. So I mean, these are very good moves that Pat Williams and
Jack
McMahon and Billy Cunningham are making for this team.
And Lloyd Free, or World B. Free, whatever you want to name him, he also he was in turn traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah,
and he was a big star in Cleveland.
Yeah,
he was the man.
Yeah. He was a great shooter.
Yeah, it's funny. I got a Joe Bryant Sixers jersey. So one day last year, I'm doing a DoorDash, and I walk in, and these two guys are standing out there. They're like, "Oh man, you got a Joe Bryant jersey?" I'm like, "Yeah, man." I'm like, "I take it back." And then they were like, "Man, that's old school." And I'm like, "Hey, man." I'm like, not only was he a decent player, I was like, but Kobe came out that man's balls. And they're like, "Oh shit." But so we get in the 76 NBA playoffs here. Like you guys touched on a little bit, they played the Buffalo Braves. Looks like Freddie Carter averaged 28 points a game, McGinnis 23, Collins 19.3, Mix. I mean, the Sixers had some really balanced scoring. I mean, but the Buffalo Braves had Bob McAdoo, and McAdoo was McAdoo ahead of his time as far as like what you would call like a stretch type center, because McAdoo could really shoot from the outside, correct?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He could play. He could play today. He can still play today.
He was like a stretch power forward.
Yes, McAdoo was like 6'9", 6'10". Think of Durant today, but stronger and a better rebounder.
A much better rebounder. Yeah.
Much better rebounder. In fact, if I had to take McAdoo in his prime against Durant in his prime, I would take McAdoo every time.
Think of today's game. Think of today's teams with the lack of centers out there. McAdoo would play great today.
Yeah, he would have absolutely had a 3-point shot.
McAdoo could do anything. Yeah.
Well, I remember this was late in his career, and obviously I was too young for the 82-83 season, but I watched it on tape because Grandpop had it on the video cassette. But I remember McAdoo played a role with the Lakers on that 83 team, and he was hitting jumpers then.
Oh yeah, he was one of they called him the Magnificent Seven. Those early 80s teams. It was
Showtime.
Yeah, Showtime. It was Kareem and Magic and Wilkes, Nixon, Rambis, McAdoo, and the seventh guy was a guard.
Yeah.
Cooper?
You said
Cooper?
Cooper. Cooper was the seventh guy.
Right.
That was the LA sports writers termed them the Magnificent Seven. So that's what they were referred to all the time because they were tremendous. And he was one of them. And he's and he had his peak years were behind him, but he was still contributing.
He killed us in the playoffs.
Oh, he killed us. Yeah, I mean you look at this 76 series when we played them in the playoffs. Game 1, McAdoo, 36 points, 23 rebounds.
Mm-hmm.
Now the second game,
they probably had George McGinnis cover them.
Yeah, exactly. Game 3, which is the key game at the Spectrum, we lost that in overtime by 1 game. McAdoo, 34 points, 22 rebounds. Now now that's what I'm saying. If I would, in my view, and I don't know what you think, Colonel, or what you think, Raj, but I would take McAdoo before I take Durant anytime, because that's just he was just so much more physical. He was stronger, and he could rebound better. God was a tremendous rebounder. It was a more complete. I think back then guys had to be more complete players in a lot of ways. Now you can be much more specialized.
I think McAdoo was one of the top 75, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, and deservingly so.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you're comparing him to Kevin Durant, then he must have been.
That's what I think of. I mean, that's what comes to mind.
But a rebounder.
But a better rebounder. He's stronger, and it's like I said. That's who I would. If somebody said you could have your choice in their prime, I would take McAdoo every time.
We got my man Sean Kilrain with the question right here. He goes, "What's up, guys? Who did you guys enjoy watching the most when you watched the Sixers?"
I'll during this period,
I guess both, either during this period or.
irregardless, nothing compares to with me, Irving.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. J it was a human highlight film all the time. We would go to the bar and watch the Sixers, and if they were on the road, we would go to Jersey and watch them because it was on Prism because they didn't have couldn't get cable in the city. And then with them, so all the playoff games, we would always go to Jersey and watch them. And he would do things that were just mind blowing. I also was a big fan of Tony when he started really lighting it up.
That was like about 1980,
Yeah,
81.
he was really tremendous player.
Well,
I guess-
for me, like Ron Irving's the obvious, but when Joey brought up how he felt about McGinnis, I mean, I like McGinnis when he was here. But then when we traded him for Bobby Jones, you're like, all right, what's the expectations, And all of a sudden, the reason the city didn't get up in an uproar because Bobby Jones came in instantaneously. You saw his value, not only on defense, but I mean, he could strip the ball, he'd run down court, slam dunk it. I mean, he played good offense too. I mean, I liked watching him play because
he probably averaged, I'm guessing, 15, 16 points a game.
Yeah.
And when you factor in, and he was a good rebounder, he was terrific on the break.
Yeah. He ran the break better.
He was a good finisher. He's just a great player.
I had the day of the Super Bowl, 1980, 81. That was because I had tickets right down on the floor for the Phoenix Suns. I mean, a couple of the guys I grew up with, we went down there, and it was at the end of the game, and the Sixers were up by 1, and the guy goes to inbound the pass down at the end where Phoenix was going to be shooting. And he had enough time. He had enough time to get a shot off. Bobby Jones jumps in front of the pass, and you see him in the air, and he's going in the air, and he's out of bounds, and he passes the ball back to, I forget, it was either Cheeks or Dr. J or whatever, and he saved the game. It was one of the greatest defensive plays I ever saw. I mean, it was just amazing. That place went ape shit.
Didn't you say in your notes they call him the Secretary of Defense?
He was known as the Secretary of Defense. He was a first team NBA all defensive team and the ABA too.
So Joe, when he came in, you forgot all about McGinnis. Trust me.
Gotcha. Yeah,
exactly. You didn't. Yeah, what? George McGinnis? Who's that?
Yeah, was it? Yeah.
So let me get to a few comments here before we move on, because I'm gonna my man Mike Lauro, you can check him out on the Gobbler Show at 9:00 on Sundays, and also he does a show at 8:00 tonight on the Out of Box Network called the Locker Room. It's really good. He touches on all 4 sports. His was the Boston Strangler. He's like a Boston Strangler, Andrew Toney. My man Dave Yarnell, he's on Patterson Avenue Fanatics. I guess maybe he was a Lakers fan. I'm not sure, but he liked Kurt Rambis. I always liked Kurt, aka Clark Kent.
He was, yeah.
Kurt Rambis was a very recognizable guy right there.
And we had Mark Ivoroni to go up against Rambis. They served the same kind of purpose. They played 20 minutes a game. They just banged. They were power forwards. They just boxed out, committed fouls. Both couldn't be in this league today, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they both hustled their ass off.
And then I got 2 questions here. The first is from Pat Bernard. He says, "Who was your favorite Sixers coach in the 70s and 80s?" I mean, I was a little young, but I would imagine it would have to be Billy Cunningham, considering they won the championship with them.
Hands down.
Yeah.
First of all, Billy Cunningham was an icon when he played here. When he came back in 74, 75 from playing the ABA for a couple of years, that was big time.
Yeah.
People were, he was just a fan favorite. And when he took over for Gene Shue,
and not just that, he was so big here, and he was such a great player, and all the guys in the league knew how great a player he was because they all played against him. He had such instant credibility coming into that locker room that if he said, "Hey, you're doing this wrong, you're that wrong." I mean, I can remember games, and I'm sure you remember too, Raj, and Carolyn, you probably remember when Andrew Toney, he would ride Andrew Toney those first couple of years. You would see him call him over, Andrew, and he was always chewing it out for something. But he made him a great player.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, yeah, and I mean, Andrew Toney, I mean, you know, he was such a great player. I mean, the Boston Celtics had to go out and get Dennis Johnson just to try to slow him down.
Yeah.
And that's how good Andrew Toney was, you know.
And the Sixers tried, and in our silly effort after the championship season or a year after that, we trade Doherty to Cleveland to get Roy Hinson to go up against Kevin McHale. Look how that worked out.
Yeah.
You know,
didn't quite work out the same. And yeah, I just want to touch on this real quick because obviously we're doing the Sixers, the old school Dr. J era, but we have a modern day question from Jeremiah Putman. He says, "What's our thoughts on Kyrie Irving having the Sixers on his list of trade destinations?" I'll answer first. I don't really think anything of it because I mean, obviously Kyrie's a great player, but him and Maxey couldn't play on the court at the same time. You'd be too small. So I don't see us being a factor. I think if he goes anywhere, it'd probably be Lakers or Miami or one of the other teams.
Colonel, what do you think?
Well, I don't know how this guy never shows up to play. He doesn't play enough games. I mean, if you knew he was good, I mean, I agree with Stephen A. Smith. I mean, if you look at this guy, I mean, he's a great player, but how do you count on him?
Exactly. That's my problem.
It's risk with a capital R.
Mm-hmm.
He marches to his own tunes.
Yeah.
He's a terrific ball player. Nobody can take that away from him.
I think it was last year in the beginning of the season, he took off like 5 games because he just didn't even show up to practice.
Family birthdays and
or something. He just didn't.
He's an
it's not always COVID. And you know, we just talked about Bobby Jones, and now you're talking about this guy. I mean,
yeah,
I'd rather have Bobby Jones today, at, you know, 70 years old or whatever he is, and Kyrie.
I wouldn't put too much money down that he would end up with the Sixers, and
we wouldn't have the money to pay him. Firstly, secondly, that would be so combustible with him and Harden together. I don't see how that possibly could work because it didn't work in Brooklyn.
I think that's more likely to be agent speak.
Yeah, that's what I think.
And I'll tell you, if we had the opportunity, if it were to develop, he's so good, you would start to say, "Geez, can we make this work?"
You be biting your tongue every game to see if he's going to play or he's not going to play, or you know.
I would rather him leave and go somewhere else and then get Durant all pissed off, and then give up whatever it took to get Durant and just go forward with Durant and Embiid and put a bunch of role players around him.
I'd be surprised if
you know what I mean. I'd rather do that.
I'd be surprised if the Lakers are maybe his first choice, even though he would be back with an old foe, former teammate LeBron.
Mm-hmm.
But as of today, there's no doubt who's the better player, and Irving is the better player than LeBron. Not to take anything away from his career. But,
maybe what they should do is try to look up where Bob McAdoo is and get him in.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. I'd rather have Bob McAdoo. You know, he'd be playing his ass off, even though he's like in his 60s.
It's going to be really interesting to see how that Nets saga plays out starting tonight. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, but Danny Frick, Taconi fellas. Some of the guys, maybe I guess you're referring to Devereaux Sports. Yeah, some of the guys, Pat Bernard, they grew up on Devereaux Street, and my uncle used to have a house right off of Devereaux. But let's get back to our timeline here because you know, now we're entering the 76-77 season, and this is where here comes Dr. J. So I can imagine. I mean, this must have been this. Was the city at a fever pitch when they got the doc?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, for a couple of reasons. They were coming off, particularly the year before, a really successful year for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and it was like the 75, 76 Phillies with Dave Cash, and it was that type of. There was a lot of good vibe coming from the city because they were a better team, and they had gotten McGinnis the year before, and Caldwell Jones and
Bryant, Free.
Darryl Dawkins.
Mhm.
And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know that much about Irving when he came to Philadelphia because with the ABA, obviously the league collapsed. But prior the last 2 or 3 years of the ABA, they didn't have a television contract,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
it was tough. It was tough to be visible to cities that had NBA, and there was a real rift between the NBA and the ABA.
Mhm.
All that goes with it. But I'll tell you what, I remember that first game, and he carried his they gave him a little doctor bag, and it didn't take long to realize he was the real deal and he was the man. And
I think it was 6 years, $6 million contract, right? Which was the
Yeah,
highest
he
at
was
the
the $6
time.
million man because that's when the TV show came on.
yeah, well,
Yeah, and he had and he wore the number 6.
Yeah,
right. We made a deal. Part of the deal was the New Jersey team, the Nets, were broke.
Yeah.
And they desperately needed money, and we bought him for $6 million.
Right.
And then he was also making at the time $600,000 a year was his initial salary. And
God, can you imagine if he was playing today? He'd be making $50 million a year.
oh yeah, he'd be making more at his peak. He'd be making more than Harden. He'd be
And-
making
and-
more than Westbrook.
And in fact, I mean, from one of the things you guys would know better than me, obviously, but one of the things I remember was the NBA was really hurting in the 70s. I mean, like for instance, I've seen many times that the game 6 of the game where Magic jumped center, which we'll touch on in a little bit, that wasn't even televised live. Like, can you imagine an NBA Finals game not on tape delay?
Well, Joey, we would go to games with Irving and all down there, but you would think with that team, you couldn't get tickets. You could always get tickets there. There wasn't always a sellout, and that blows my mind when you have the team they had. You know?
Yeah, that's true. That was the one thing. And back in that era, Flyers always sold out. But it seems like Sixers, you could never get a sellout a lot
Wow.
of times.
We could always go down to a game.
Unless it was certain teams like Boston,
yeah,
Lakers came in. But if it was like they were playing.
they really started highlighting the opponents because I know from going down there, they would give the upcoming games and don't miss Houston Rockets with Moses Malone.
Yeah.
And this, Malone came out of high school into the
Yeah.
NBA, and Houston was just back, in 76-ish or 77. Houston was just only in the NBA for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But you got to see all these ABA players, and the one thing that stands out when I first think of when Irving first got on the team, he was the only player I ever saw that when he got the ball, there was the place literally would stand up.
Wow.
In expectation. I compared it to the Flyers with Rick McLeish, who was a great offensive.
Well, tell him what talk about that Cedric Maxwell scenario you were telling me about.
Oh, on the Dr. J biography that was on the NBA channel, I think that was about 4 or 5 years ago or so. It was they had all obviously the opposing players, the interviews and stuff like that, and Cedric Maxwell, who turned out to be a good friend of Irving's, which I never knew till I watched the biography. But his comment was the first time the Celtics came in to play Philadelphia after Irving was signed, Irving made one of his patented moves, intercepted a pass, and he took like 2 dribbles, and Cedric Maxwell said, all of a sudden the place was standing and screaming, and he says, I only know one thing, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah. So this is so obviously, so this is the start of the Dr. J run. I mean, so 76, 77, Sixers win the Atlantic. They win 50 and 32. key off-season additions. Obviously, we have Dr. J. They also got point guard by the name of Henry Bibby from the New Orleans Jazz. Most talented team in the league. 3 NBA All-Stars. You had Dr. J, you had McGinnis, you had Collins. Julius Erving, 21.6 points. McGinnis, 21.4. Doug Collins, 18.3. In the 77 playoffs, they won the Eastern Conference semifinals 4-3 versus Boston. Doug Collins and Dr. J each averaged 24 points in the playoffs. Or I guess the Celtics had White and Havlicek with
JoJo
20.
White, John Havlicek,
Yeah, with 20.
Dave Cowens.
Sixers won the Eastern Conference Finals 4-2 versus the Houston Rockets. How the hell did that happen?
Well, Houston was in the East back then.
Back then.
That's
like
weird.
like Dallas Cowboys are in the East with,
Yeah.
In football.
And Malone, at that point, Moses Malone is what, 18 years old, 19 years old,
In what year?
76, 77,
He would have been 20, 21 years old.
20, 21 years
He
old.
was born in 56.
He averaged 18 points a game and 17.2 rebounds a game against us in that Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah,
One thing to add with regard to the Sixers in that 76-77 season, CBS had the NBA contract, and they always had games. Their main day was on Sunday,
Mhm.
and I don't know how many games we were televised,
Mhm.
but it was like almost every week we were one of the Sunday games.
Mm-hmm.
We were Showtime before Showtime.
Because of the doctor,
Right.
Brett Musburger.
And-
That's what he used to say, that here comes the doctor. That saying right there, that was Brent Musburger. Here comes the doctor, especially when he would steal the ball and he would be going down for a jam.
Well, here's a question by Pat Bernard. He says, how much of a one-man wrecking crew was Dr. J?
Uh,
I mean, but it looked like the team was really good though too. So
Our team was tremendous.
and at the time, being coached by Gene Shue, he did not. They were hesitant. They had the feeling that if they turned him loose the way he was in the ABA, it would set McGinnis off. Well, hindsight,
Mhm.
you say, goodbye, George.
Yeah.
Irving could have scored 30, 35 points a game.
Yeah, there was some ego type thing between those two guys. Not as much Dr. J but McGinnis. McGinnis knew how great Irving was, but I mean, I think there was just a lot of jealousy on his part.
Well, a credit to Irving is he was the
He was a gentleman.
He was the gentleman. He was the diplomat.
Yeah.
And the coach asked him to do something. He says, "Okay." I've seen him interviewed recently, and it may have been in his biography, where he really, when he was in the playoffs, he really took offense to being controlled by Gene Shue.
Gotcha. Yeah. So here we play in the NBA Finals versus the Bill Walton-led Portland Trailblazers. Sixers were the favorites in that series.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I remember just from hearing stories was Sixers were up 2-0. Unfortunately, Portland came back and won 4 in a row. Some memorable, Dr. J averaged 30 points, Doug Collins 20. Portland was like a really well-balanced team. I mean, you had Bill Walton. That's a shame Bill Walton had to get hurt because he was such a great player.
And don't overlook Jack Ramsey as the head coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bill Walton averages 18 and a half, 19.7 rebounds. Maurice Lucas, 19.7 and 11. So what I'm gathering from this, I mean, you guys saw the series, I didn't, but Portland must have dominated the boards because it looked like they were much bigger than the Sixers.
Yeah. Well, Walton was he was just so intimidating.
Two totally different teams.
Mm-hmm.
And excuse me, the impetus of the turnaround, we won the first 2 games in Philadelphia rather easily.
Mm-hmm.
And once it went out to Portland, coming off of the second, I guess it was, trying to think of was it the second game of the fight?
Game 2 in Spectrum was the fight between Dawkins and
That was a turnaround in the series after that fight.
What Doug Collins commented on it retrospectively with that game, he said that fight pulled Portland together, and it pulled us apart.
Yeah.
That was his comments.
So that was the turning point.
Well, I think I remember hearing like Dawkins was upset too because he didn't think the team had his back. But if Dawkins could have just concentrated more just on rebounds that series, he kind of, I think he kind of went on the back burner after that fight.
Yeah, and Bob, he was never known as a real rebounder. He was
but he had the size to be.
Yeah,
he was a physical specimen. Pretty good handling the ball, surprisingly.
Mm-hmm.
His dunks, etc. But he was not the easiest guy to coach.
Mm-hmm.
And Shu was from the old school. Shu had played in the 50s and early 60s. He was a 5 or 6 time All-Star. So he was like, he came from like, it'd be the equivalent of like a guy that played in the 70s that was playing for a Lombardi type,
Mm-hmm.
Or a Mike Ditka, like the old school type guys, didn't,
And the other,
But I blame coaching in that whole season. I mean, they should have made him with his size. We didn't need him to be a scorer. They should have played him more. And Joey hit it on the head. Those guys pretty much out rebounded us, out physical. They were more physical.
I think they tried, but again, he was not really receptive to. Once he got out on the court, they were, and he even commented on it. I've seen him interviews from him, and he said whenever you got on the court with that team, everybody that got the ball wanted to shoot,
right,
or score.
Before the finals,
we had scorers. We didn't
before
need
the
him to be a
finals
scorer.
that year on ABC World News Tonight. They had, back then there was a guy named Dick Schaap. He has a son named Jeremy Schaap, who does sports for ESPN and stuff. But Dick Schaap was he was a big time sports writer
From Doylestown.
and sports broadcaster back in the 70s. I mean, he was one of the top guys. And they did a feature on the Sixers, and he called it the greatest team ever assembled as far as talent wise. And they had everything. You look at shooting, rebounding, defense. I mean, they had it all.
Right.
Should definitely. That's why they should have won that championship.
So
and the thing that was what Rod was talking about with Gene Shue controlling Irving in Game 6 at Portland. Irving scored 40 points in that game. But anyway, McGinnis got the last shot. McGinnis took the last shot in the game. He used to have this push shot.
One-handed.
He would
One-handed
like
push
this.
shot. And he came up, and it came up short. And I remember I watched that game with my father. And I can remember my father got up after he missed that shot, and we lost. And he walked over to the front door, and it's the only time I had ever thought my father was going to start crying. He looked like he was just about to start crying. That's how, because he was a diehard. We all were. And I mean, why is McGinnis taking the last shot when Irving was hot? They couldn't stop him.
Isn't it hard to tell?
And the other thing real quickly about Dawkins, what killed his career basically, invariably he was always in foul trouble. So he didn't have the benefit of playing a lot
That's a
of minutes
scammer.
per game.
Gotcha. So here we get. So this is where the Sixers have the saying where Dr. J goes, "We owe you one. We owe you one." So
they featured a commercial that fall
At least before the next season.
And they showed him in the locker room, and he closes the locker, and he looks at the camera, and he's there. We owe you one. Then it's pause. We owe you one. It was great. And anybody that was alive back then, remember, there was a Sixers fan who remember that.
Unfortunately, that turned into a real issue with them because the following, it was another 6 years before they got to actually be number one.
Yeah.
And they had a hard time living that advertising.
Yeah.
yeah.
They
So
really did.
let's fast forward a little bit here. So the next season, they again win 55 games. They finish first in the Atlantic. But unfortunately, they don't make it back to the finals. They lose to the Washington Bullets, the Elvin Hayes, Wes Unseld Washington Bullets, who would eventually become the NBA champions. They beat the Seattle Supersonics in the NBA Finals. So the Sixers didn't get back in 78. 78-79, it looks like they take a step back. Billy Cunningham is the coach. And here's Chuck Daly becomes an assistant, it looks like, at this point. So Chuck Daly hops on as an assistant, future Hall of Famer. The 78-79 team.
This is when they trade McGinnis for Bobby Jones.
Okay.
And they draft Maurice Cheeks. So you can see they're still putting the building blocks together.
Yeah, I see that. Okay.
Jack McMahon and Pat Williams, right?
Look at the players. Look how they turned out. Cheeks is their all-time point guard,
Hall of Famer,
and he started his rookie year.
Yeah,
never said a word. It was totally intimidated by the whole experience of coming into the NBA and then being in charge of the team. But once you got on the court,
he came from, I believe it was Southwest Texas. Does that sound about right? Something like that.
Yeah, it was something like that. But
Southwest Texas State or something. I mean, he was a real small school.
Tony came from Alcorn State.
Yeah, Tony came from Alcorn State.
Oh, okay. So here, 79 playoffs again.
And another thing that was important too was that was the year they traded World B. Free to the 1984 first round pick, and that ultimately became Charles Barkley. So again, McMahon and Billy Cunningham and Pat Williams. I mean,
they were making some great moves.
They were making amazing moves every year,
and they had some real dunces in running the other teams too.
Yeah,
but they knew how to leverage that.
Well, this kind of touches on what we're talking about. Pat Bernard has a question. He says, who were the most underrated picks in the 70s and 80s? I mean, you could say either Maurice Cheeks or Andrew Toney, honestly, probably, right? Considering where they were picked.
I'm sure.
Either one of those guys. And, so here we go. They, unfortunately, in 79, they only made the Eastern Conference semifinals. They lost in 7 games to the San Antonio Spurs. The Iceman, George Gervin, beat them. And the Seattle Supersonics would win the championship that year.
Yeah, they beat the Bullets, so it was like a switch. They were both good teams, Seattle and Washington.
I went to a playoff game with the Spurs and
the
Sixers, and obviously the teams from Texas must have been considered in the East because how would we face them in the playoffs other than being
right?
So when they added teams, they realigned.
Yeah, well, it was after the NBA merger, so they were just. There was like it wasn't done
right
as well. It wasn't done as after. Then they started expanding even further, and then they did better geographical divisions and things.
Right.
Yeah. So here we enter the decade of the 80s, 79-80 season. And in the decade of the 80s, the early 80s, the Sixers make the finals three of the first 4 years. They make the NBA finals, and the one year they didn't make it, I was always told that was the year we would have won the championship because that was the year that Houston beat the Lakers.
80-81.
And that was when 81 the Sixers blew a 3-1 lead to the Celtics.
Right.
And the Celtics wound up winning the championship. That was Larry Bird's first championship.
Yeah.
But it should have been the Sixers.
Definitely.
So 79-80, Sixers finished 59-23. I don't see where did they get Andrew Toney? And maybe you have that one. Did they get Toney before 1980?
No, 1980.
1980, they got Toney. Okay. All right. So here they win 59 games. Key offseason additions. They got Clint Richardson, the guard, a guard by the name of Jim Spanarkel. Center Earl Cureton, who was a good backup. They traded Joe Bryant to the San Diego Clippers for the 1986 first round pick, which was Brad Daugherty. Which unfortunately we screwed that up.
So again,
that was Roy Hinson.
By this owner, these executives and these coaches, this organization was sound. And so then Katz came in his crew and they destroyed it in the long haul.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Seriously.
So-
didn't take long.
So in the decade of the 80s, the Sixers played the Lakers 3 times in the finals. This particular year was the first time. And Sixers played the Lakers. Unfortunately, they lost the series 4-2. This was Magic Johnson's rookie year. And this was the famous game where Kareem got hurt in Game 5.
Yeah.
And I got to imagine that the whole city of Philadelphia thought that this was going 7 with Kareem out.
Oh yeah, I was at Game 6. That's what I
Okay.
thought. I thought for sure it was going to be. I thought for sure we were going to take Game 6, and if Kareem was going to be out, we had a shot at taking this out in Los Angeles.
And then
Definitely.
And Bob, what was your recollection from Game 6? Like watching Magic, I got to think that Magic Johnson's performance was like one of the greatest performances ever, and
Finals
it's
history.
got to be one of the greatest performances in finals history. The way I'm looking
Plus,
at it.
when you factor in he was a rookie,
Yeah, because like you said, when Jabbar was out, you thought, okay, that's a done deal.
Yeah.
plus the
So
game was in Philadelphia.
yeah. So unfortunately, they lose that series. That's the Lakers' first championship of their 5, because the Lakers won 5 championships in the 80s. In fact, the Lakers were in the finals 8 out of the 10 years, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. The Showtime Lakers.
Yeah, but back then, I mean, really, if you look at that whole the 80s, you look at the Western Conference.
It was weak.
It was weak. That was usually San Antonio played the Lakers. The East was the toughest. We had Boston, you had Sixers, Milwaukee,
Right.
And then later it was Detroit, right? Detroit, Boston,
In the late
yeah, the Knicks
Knicks.
with
Yeah.
Patrick Ewing. Yeah,
The West was
West was weak.
not
weaker.
that difficult to dominate back then.
Yeah.
Like Mark said, you had San Antonio in the picture. Houston, not so much.
Yeah.
I
I mean, Houston, the year Houston got into the finals, 80-81, the year that we lost 3 games to Boston. They got in with a 40-42 record. I think it's the only team in NBA history that ever got to the finals with a below 500 record. I mean, it's amazing if you think about it.
Phoenix was terrible. Seattle
The
won.
Warriors were bad. A lot of teams.
Seattle won in '79, but
Yeah.
by
They had Jack Sikma, and I forget who else they had.
Fred Brown.
Yeah, the Warriors were bad. The Western Conference wasn't.
Well, here actually, you have right here the Sixers actually got Tony before the 80-81 season.
Yeah.
So Andrew Tony was the key off-season acquisition. And touching on what you said in 81, they had a 3-1 lead versus Boston, which unfortunately they blew. But I'm looking in the semifinals, because one thing we got to recognize here is it seems like every year it was Sixers, Milwaukee, Boston were the top 3 teams in the East. It looks like the East was a gauntlet, because the Sixers beat Milwaukee in 7, which must have been a hell of a series.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at this Milwaukee team, and you got Marcus Johnson, you got Bob Lanier, Sidney Moncrief. I mean, that was a
Junior
hell of a
Bridges.
team. Junior
Yeah.
Bridgman.
They were always Milwaukee back then. Always had more than 50 wins. That's how good they were. And we had that year. We had, what was it? 80-81. We had 62 wins, and we were second in the Atlantic. Boston had more than we did.
Yeah, Milwaukee was legitimately a good team. However, the same applies to them, in my opinion. Who were they playing? They were playing Cleveland, who was just dreadful.
Mhm.
They were playing
The Bulls sucked back then.
Chicago, Chicago was just dreadful.
Detroit was bad.
Yeah,
Detroit was
Indiana.
dreadful.
Yeah, that was their confidence.
Indiana was maybe like the only competition to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not taking anything away from Milwaukee. They were a good team. All our playoff series were tooth and nail with them.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, that's true.
Great
Yeah.
series.
But
Yeah.
it just shows you Milwaukee lost Oscar Robertson, Lou Alcindor, and I think even Bobby Dandridge, just to your point, and they were still competitive even losing those 3 guys, those 3 Hall of Famers. So
Right, and
that goes to tell you about the competition they had.
Well, they had a great front office, obviously, because they replaced them with guys like Sidney Moncrief and all that guys.
And they had Quinn Buckner.
Yeah,
Good
Quinn
player.
Buck. Yeah,
I think they were. I think they were trying to make a trade for Julius Erving for like Moncrief and a few of those guys, weren't they, Mark? And we turned it down.
I don't remember that.
In Julius's near Julius's end of his career, I think they wanted the name out there. We could have had a bunch of those guys.
At the end of Dr. J's career, I remember.
Well, Detroit too, but
there was talk of trading him to the Clippers for Tyree Cummings.
Terry Cummings.
The guy's name was Tyree Cummings, but
yeah, I remember Terry Cummings.
They were never going to trade, which would have been the move. But they've never noticed. They would never have traded Dr. J. It'd be like trying to trade Bobby Clark back then.
They were also
or Bernie. You never would have done it.
He was also fairly close to going to Utah, and that was Harold Katz influence with that. And this was God. This was maybe 2 years before he retired or so, and it flared up and it had some legs, and the city literally prevented that from happening.
Yeah.
When the rumors came out, I mean, people were pissed off.
They were like picketing outside Howard Katz's house. He lived in Huntington Valley, which is only 5 or 10 minutes
from here,
from where we are, and he had a gated entrance to his house, and there were literally people that would get there. Not many, but a dozen or so people, and they were picketing. Nobody deserved it more, but Utah was going to happen.
Had there been sports radio back in the early 80s, because it didn't come till the late 80s when first it was Tom Brookshire, then it was Angelo, right? But if had there been sports radio back then, and people they were talking about trying to get rid of Dr. J, telling you that, like I said, like Raj said, there were people protesting at Katz's house.
Yeah.
Instead of being like maybe 20, there would be hundreds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking here. I mean, like you got like I was always told. I mean, like Grandpop always said, the '81 season was like the biggest heartbreaker because I mean, they have a 3-1 lead against Boston, against the Larry Bird led Celtics, and they lost 3 consecutive games by a total of 5 points. They lost Game 5 at the Garden, 111-109. Game 6 at the Spectrum, 100-98, and then Game 7 at the Garden, 91-90. I mean, this series because of Moses going to the finals with basically 4 guys, four Jags, basically just another guy.
Absolutely.
Whoever won this series was going to win the championship, and this must have been the start of Andrew Toney because Andrew Toney is only a rookie at this point. But he averages 19 points a game against the Celtics. This must have been the start of the Boston Strangler, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he had prolific regular season games against them too.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, we probably would have played back then. We were playing Boston maybe 9 times.
Yeah, at least
8 or 9 times. I think we only play him 4 times in the season now because of the league expansion and whatnot.
Yeah.
But anyway, he and it was the Boston Press that came up with the nickname of the
and they actually had a cover of Sports Illustrated where they show him with doing his jumper and it said the Boston Strangler.
Yeah.
They actually made the cover of Sports Illustrated, do you remember?
Yep.
He had this real peculiar jumper. It came from like here.
Yeah.
It wasn't like up here. It came from, there'd be times he'd be in the air and it would be like here. And it was just.
It wasn't all much different than, it was almost like some kind of hybrid set shot.
Yeah. Like what it reminded me of in some ways, it was like kind of like Hal Greer. Hal Greer used to when he took his shots, they seemed to.
Except he had perfect form.
Oh, yeah.
Tony did not really necessarily have perfect form.
No.
But he, obviously,
when he was on, he was lights out. Nobody
range.
Yeah, he did have range.
I remember. I mean, I was too young to see him live, but just from seeing the series versus the Lakers or whatever, like he looked like for his size, he had an amazing ability to be able to shoot over big guys. It looked like he wasn't intimidated at all. He could drive the lane, hit that little
quick release.
Yeah.
So the picture I gave Dad, this series, is this the same series where Irvin and Bird
No,
Brad
that
Mills.
happened in
That
that
was a
ac-
preseason game.
yeah, that actually happened. I think it was like 1984 in a preseason.
Yeah, that was
game.
Okay, a little bit after this one. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny because Andrew Toney's known as the Boston Strangler, but you could have called Dr. J the Larry Bird Strangler there.
Yeah, Ray
Yeah.
Auerbach got involved, and
Yeah.
it was interesting, but and of course, in particular because it was a preseason game.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
the thing about Tony too was he was strong,
He
very strong upper body.
and overlooked. He was an underrated, to some degree, an underrated defensive player. He was just a terrific all around.
I think Pat had a question: who was underrated? We both answered Cheeks and Tony.
yeah,
There's your answer, Pat. Those two guys, most definitely. I mean, because when they brought Tony in, like Roger said, he came from Alcorn State. What was that? I think it's in Ohio, but
well, and
I don't
it's
even know
funny.
where it is.
And here's another interesting aspect. So we get to the 81-82 season, and I'm looking at this record, and the Sixers are 58-24, but only second in the Atlantic. So it just goes to show you how. I mean, obviously we already knew this, but it just goes to show you how friggin' awesome those Boston Celtics teams were, because you're winning 58 games and you're not even winning your division.
Yeah.
I mean, think about
and
that.
the year before, it was we won 62 and 20, and we were still second.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that's how unbelievably amazing like those Larry Bird, McHale Celtics teams were.
And that's a stretch where we've been given it year by year. At that point where we're at now, it goes back 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
Of that length of time. Terrific basketball, and then you factor in that we were competing against the Celtics, who won world championships. Washington,
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee.
Great basketball back then.
Hey, Boncaro from Duke just went #1, by the way.
Okay.
That's
Oh
a
wow.
safe-
Okay.
What's he say?
That's a good safe pick for them.
The kid from Duke went #1. You know what's ironic is Wojnarowski said it was going to be the other kid, and Vegas said it was the kid from Duke. So obviously, let's keep it real. Vegas usually knows because the
Yeah.
kid from Duke was the betting favorite.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. So we get to the 81-82 season. Sixers second place. They play Boston again, and once again the Sixers get up 3-1, and they lose. They lose game 5 and they lose game 6. So they go to they go to Boston, and from what I remember, from what I was told or whatever, everybody just was marking it off. Oh my God, you guys choked. I think the media was already saying that they choked, and it really lit a fire in the locker room.
Both medias, Philadelphia and Boston, had it written off. And Bill Fitch, who was the coach of the Celtics at the time, was quoted as saying, when they asked him about Philadelphia coming back to Boston, he said, they'll be so tight you won't be able to stick a pin up their ass. And I went to game 6 in Philadelphia and saw that loss. And it was a tough game, but we lost. And I believe game 7 was that Sunday.
Yeah, it was a Sunday. I remember watching.
And Steve Fredericks was on the radio doing the game, and he was terrific.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Broadcasting those games, and he would make comments like Andrew Toney, bang, and he was really good to listen to. And I remember when they won that game, we drove down. We got we called and we got the flight number, and we went down to be part of the greeting.
Yeah.
Of getting them back off. When they came back from the off the plane.
That's pretty cool.
But
I've never done that.
I went from the low of game 6 to the high of game 7,
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it here. So
and that was the beat LA cheer in
Yeah.
Boston.
well, yeah, I always, I mean, obviously, I hate the Celtics, and Sixers and Celtics is like a great rivalry, but I always thought that was really cool. That was because it just the teams were so evenly matched and such great rivals that it was like it was a really cool like respect thing where they probably were like, okay, wow, good,
If we
hey, it
can't-
sucks we lost, but good for you guys. You
Right.
guys really showed up a lot of balls. You know what I
They had
mean?
a common enemy.
Yeah, because Boston and LA have always hated each other too. So in Game 7, Andrew Toney had 30 points. And he had here we go. He had 30 in Game 2, 39 in Game 4, 34 in Game 7, and he's referred to as the Boston Strangler.
That's awesome.
So the Sixers make the finals again this year. Unfortunately, they lose to the Lakers again in 6. Unfortunately, we couldn't get over that hump.
Right.
So now we come into 1980.
And another thing, that season that we lost to the Lakers 4-2 that year, Lakers out rebounded us by 6. That whole game, that game, 6 rebounds a game.
And we had. Go ahead, Lord.
And I was just going to say, and this was the impetus to bring in Malone the following year.
Yeah,
Malone was the
He was the missing piece.
perennial rebounding champ in the league for a number of years. And they needed some guy that could just go up against Kareem and just get physical with it.
That's what I was going to say. Even though Kareem was not a rebounder, we had no one that could stop him offensively, and it wasn't just us. Every other team in the league, but we being facing them 2 out of 3 years in the finals, the light bulb went off, and the way to beat them was to get Malone.
Yeah,
and it worked.
Okay, so here we enter the 82-83 season. This is one of the greatest teams in NBA history. 76ers finished 65-17. They have 4 NBA All-Stars, Dr. J, Malone, Cheeks, and Toney. The NBA MVP and the NBA Finals MVP is Moses Malone. Bobby Jones. They were a great defensive team. Bobby Jones, Malone, and Cheeks were all NBA defensive first team. At this point, Dr. J really isn't the high-flying scorer that he was back earlier in his career, especially against like the Trailblazers. This was more of Malone's team, correct? Like Malone and even Andrew Toney probably took on a bigger scoring role than Doc.
Offensively, yes.
Yeah.
And
they ran the offense more through Malone.
I remember they had every game that their first possession every game, they had a set play for Andrew Toney, and he would start on the right wing and then flash the baseline to get on the left side. Again, baseline shot, and ball was always in his hands. And I don't know what the shooting percentage was, but that was their opening play every game. And it was almost like a little bit of a turnaround, 10-footer on the baseline from the left side, and it was money. But Irving didn't have to do so much because of the supporting cast.
Yeah, so I'm looking, obviously, the number one major acquisition was the Moses Malone. They got him in a trade for Caldwell Jones and a first-round draft pick. They acquired center Clement Johnson from Indiana Pacers. They signed Mark Ivoroni and small forward Reggie Johnson. They drafted Mark McNamara. He wasn't really a part of it. I mean, was he just a journeyman, correct?
Yes.
So they were the main acquisition. So we get to the 83 NBA playoffs. Here's where Moses Malone, I have right here in the header, it says faux. It actually became faux 5-0, but that's all right though.
Yeah.
So the first round they swept the New York Knicks in 4. Moses averaged 31 points. And then you got the Eastern Conference Finals. They beat the Milwaukee Bucks 4-1. That was the only loss they had in the playoffs.
Right.
And then, of course, when they played the Lakers, they finally got their revenge on the Los Angeles Lakers. The Sixers went out there and swept them 4-0.
Yeah, and the Lakers had a really tough physical series against the Spurs to advance to the finals. They had we coming off of 4-5, and they had a 7-game series against the Spurs that really you could tell they took it.
Well, they also, I mean, not to obviously, I think the Sixers were destined to win that
No
year
question.
anyway. But
No question.
but James Worthy was hurt because
Oh.
James Worthy was a
Well,
rookie. Wasn't James Worthy a rookie that year? I believe.
Uh,
I'm pretty sure Worthy was hurt, and that was a big. That
they
would have
had
been a big
couple
loss
players.
for
They
them.
weren't 100%, and like I said, in particular, coming off a real tough series against the Spurs when we were laying back and waiting for them. Yeah, but regardless,
Yeah, that was the
Nobody
team.
disputes.
Sixers were a team of destiny that
they
year.
won 65 games in the year. Nobody disputes who was the best team in the league.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the history of the NBA. The 67, 68 Sixers and the 82, 83 Sixers, arguably two of the best top 10 teams in the history of the NBA ever. You have like, the Bulls at 170 games, the Warriors at 173 games. You know, I have a couple others, but the Boston '86 team,
Mm-hmm.
that was a fabulous team with Walton when he came off the bench. But this particular team is one of the greatest ever assembled.
Mark
So-
Ivoroni was starting, but Bobby Jones would come in as the sixth man. But
That's right.
but if you look at their wins that year, 65 wins. If they knew they could have won a lot more than that. I remember watching like every game or listening to them on the radio. There was games that they could have blown people out, but they're resting players or just they were so far ahead.
Well, Bob,
They-
they had to, go ahead.
Like if they knew they needed like 72 wins for the record best or whatever. What does Golden State have now? I forget what
Golden
they
State was seven. Golden
At
State was
73.
73-9.
right. So if they had a 73-9 record ahead of them that year, they would have definitely got 74 wins. Is my point. But they could have done it. It's hard to keep the pedal on the floor that time, and some of those teams they were playing and how great they were. I mean, they just didn't need to win all those games.
Well, the other thing, Bob, toward the end of the season, Malone came down with tendonitis in his knee, and they sat him about 5 or 6 games, and that's really what prevented them from really getting to over 70. Because I was telling Mark earlier, I guess it would have been around late March or early April. They were a cover on the Sports Illustrated, and the heading was "The Sixers Go for 70." And
Okay.
shortly thereafter, I guess it was this Sports Illustrated jinx or whatever.
Right.
Malone again came down with tendonitis, and he rested 5, 6, maybe even 7 games toward the end of the season, and rightfully so, because he turned out to be the MVP in the playoffs. But
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, we finally made good on the "we owe you one" promise. Dr. J finally got his ring. A lot of sport, just basically just basketball fans from around the country. I mean, we're just happy for Dr. J to finally get that title. And Philadelphia was the centerpiece of the NBA that year.
absolutely, from start to finish.
They were talking dynasty. They were talking dynasty then.
Well, yeah, that's actually, before we wrap up here, because I have a note here, because that team was so great, and then I'm looking at this 83-84 season, and they slipped down a little bit to 52-30, and they get they were only 500 on the road. I think they were like 20-21 on the road. So you go from like this high to like just being 500 on the road and winning 13 games less than the previous year. I got to think maybe there was a little bit of a championship hangover, maybe because they got over that hump.
I think injuries too. I think Tony sustained some injuries.
The hangover was definitely there.
Yeah.
And to add insult, they lost to the Nets in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's right. And they lost all 3 at the Spectrum,
Yeah.
which you would never. I mean, but you're still not ready to say the dynasty. There's still a chance for a dynasty there because, unfortunately, they had the hiccup and they lost in round 1. But then you go into the 84-85 season and you get Charles Barkley with the 5th pick, future NBA Hall of Famer Charles Barkley added to this team.
Yeah.
Right. So the Sixers in 84-85, they finished 58-24, They make the Eastern Conference Finals again, but of course, they lose to a great Boston team 4-1. Well, this was Andrew Toney's last full season.
Yeah.
And so this was, I'm assuming that because after this particular year, Dr. J was forced to play guard his last 2 years in the NBA.
Correct.
All right. So that must have been frustrating because here you're looking at a team that wins 58 games. If Andrew Toney doesn't get hurt, who knows what happens? But of course, the Celtics are right in the middle of their dynasty at this point.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, what that really prohibited was Tony's, and I'm stating the obvious, he was a player that you could have relied on to be your number one go-to offensive player. And unfortunately for him, his feet failed him,
Yeah. So,
Katz played a major.
Katz played a major role in that because Katz was like saying it was like if he wasn't saying he was intimating that he was a malingerer,
right?
Like he was a guy on workman's comp that wasn't hurt, one of those types.
When he was hurt, he was not sitting on the bench; he was sitting in the stands.
Mm-hmm.
That was directive from Howard Katz. Just
well,
petty.
And Andrew Toney, I mean, I don't think he's ever come back to the team has reached out to him to do certain things. He's never come back.
Once or twice.
Yeah, he doesn't come back. Right. So then I'm looking at now this was when I first started watching basketball, 85, 86. They were 54-28. This was the last season of Bobby Jones. They only made the semifinals that year. They lost in 7 games to the Bucks, but this is where Moses Malone, I was actually at the game. It was the first game I was ever at. First game I was ever at. It was Good Friday in 1986. I won tickets for the father-son night. So Grandpa took me down to the game, and Moses got poked in the eye, and from that moment on, he wore goggles in his career.
You're right.
But that was Moses's last game as a Sixer. It was also Bobby Jones's last season as a Sixer. You lost Toney at this point, so basically,
and Dr. J's at the end of the career.
Dr. J is because Dr. J was going to play his last year in 86, 87, but this is at this point it's clearly Barkley's team,
right?
So Barkley, from what I remember, Barkley carried them to a first-round win, I believe, against the Bullets. I think Barkley was he had like a couple game-winning shots or something like that, and unfortunately, this 85-86 team was still good, 54 wins, but then they screwed up the dynasty in the 86 draft. The 86 draft was where Howard Katz screwed everything up.
Right. Making the trade.
He trades Darby to Cleveland.
You got Jeff Ruland. He couldn't last.
And Roy Hinson only had good games against us.
Right.
So they thought, let's get this guy. So they go to Darby, he goes to Cleveland, and he becomes an all-star for 8 years in a row. And then he trades Malone to Washington, and they bring in Jeff Ruland, and he plays 5 games, and then that's it. His career's over.
And they got a guy by the name of Cliff Robinson.
They got a guy named Cliff Robinson who was doing cocaine. And but anyway, Malone had 3 more all-star seasons after we traded him.
Yeah.
Imagine him with Brad Daugherty and Barkley. Because Brad Daugherty probably would have played power forward for us, right? We have Barkley, Brad Daugherty, and Moses Malone.
Right.
Yeah. We would have had Malone. We could have Daugherty and Barkley. That would have been in your front court.
Yeah, but
seriously.
Yeah, it's on.
Cheeks was still playing.
I'll be honest with you. When that trade happened, if Ruland had have been perfectly healthy, I had no problem with it because Ruland was a stud.
Yeah, he could rebound, great passer.
And he was about 6-7 years younger. He was
about
26, 27 years old.
Well, I was going to say, from what I remember, the reasoning of the trade was because of Ruland's outlet passing, because Barkley was such a great athlete. They wanted Ruland to be able to throw the outlet pass to Barkley, and Barkley could run down the court.
Ruland was like a Jokic kind of passer. Ruland could pass like the Joker right now. In fact, the couple games he played for us, I mean, he really looked good until he only lasted 5 games though.
Yeah, they came out the block. They came out of the gun. They started the block 5-0, and then all of a sudden he was done.
He was similar to like Willis Reed on the outlet passes.
Mm-hmm.
when Willis.
I got a story about that. A good friend of mine I used to work with when I was in World Trade Center. Her husband was just out of medical school, and he was the Sixers team doctor back then. And so when they came to evaluate Ruland, he looked at Ruland, and he told Katz personally, he said, whatever you do not trade for this guy. This guy's knee is
bone on bone.
It's bone on bone. Just don't do it. He did it anyway. So my friend's husband quit. She's like, I can't work for a guy like this. She's not going to take my advice. You know,
I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you. Didn't they do a medical on him?
Yeah, he was the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Bob?
No, I was going to just say, wouldn't they have done a good medical on him? It sounds like they did, but Katz screwed that up.
Yeah, it's just a shame because, again, you know, obviously I want to, you know, I mean, I'm very thankful for the championship in '83. You know, I mean, obviously the '83 team was one of the greatest teams of all time. So, you know, I don't want to be quote unquote pissing in the Cheerios here because I am, you know, I'd like to celebrate that championship, but I can't help but be maybe just a little bit down in the fact that that team in that era was so good. I mean, all those 50+ win seasons, and then you stop and look at, you get a Hall of Famer like a Charles Barkley to add on to these guys. And, you know, between bad management decisions and unluck, like with Andrew Toney getting hurt, I mean, this team really could have been set up for great success. And they pissed it away.
There was a major transition, obviously, after '83.
Because
Cunningham retired, Jack McMahon passed away. The fabric of the team changed.
Pat Williams went to Orlando.
They couldn't stand Katz.
Yeah, that's what it was. Everybody hated Katz. That's why they all got out. Pat Williams went to Orlando.
He did bring in Moses, so I don't think we would have had Moses so if we didn't have Katz, right?
Katz, well, he did, yeah, but Katz just had the money to buy.
Well, I was gonna say that probably got to his head because they couldn't get over the hump. Katz comes in and buys the team. He gets Moses. They win, and then they
thinks he knows basketball. Right. I mean, there's a story in the later '80s.
Sean Bradley.
Yeah, there's a story in the later '80s when he had Charles Shackelford come over to his house and gave him a tryout in his driveway, and what do you call it? There was a big argument in the locker room. This was when Barkley was playing with Armin Gilliam. He called him Sharman.
Yeah.
And he called him Shackelford. And Barkley talked about this on Mike Missinelli one time. And he said Shackelford always went out and he started every game, but he got 2 fouls so quickly, then I had to pick him off the floor. And he said to him, why the hell is you always getting 2 fouls early all the time? He said, so people will stop booing me.
Yeah. Barkley commented the one time, he goes, I asked for Shaq. They gave me Shackelford.
I mean, he's famous for one thing, that dunk he made for North Carolina State with Valvano. That's it. Yeah. Otherwise, he did nothing.
Yeah, it was
terrible.
Harold Katz, like I said, that nobody can tell me that it just got to the point with each one of those individuals in the management, let alone the players, who they just couldn't tolerate working for him.
Yeah. Well, you know what though? Hey, let's give them credit for one thing. They did win in '83, and they had, you know, like we said, this show was called From Worst to First, the 10-year Odyssey, right?
Yeah.
And you know, we went a little over the 10 years, but you know, bottom line is from 72, 73, they won 9 games. They became an unbelievably successful franchise. And, you know, they brought in a guy who helped save the NBA because Dr. J, along with Magic and Bird, probably saved the NBA.
Right.
And then, of course, when Michael Jordan came in, he elevated it to a whole other stratosphere. But
it started with
Dr. J and Magic and Bird. So, you know what? no matter what, maybe, we could sit here and I could sit here and argue and say like, oh, it would have been nice to win a couple, but hey, they did get one.
Yeah.
So, so we're going to get ready to wrap up here. And, I hope everybody enjoyed this walk down memory lane. We got an NBA draft tonight. So, Sixers probably won't be picking probably till maybe about 10 o'clock. Or if they do pick, I'm kind of hoping they don't pick. I hope they get somebody. But I hope everybody enjoyed this walk down memory lane. And
we'll be back. My brother, the Colonel, is going back to visit the land of our ancestors, Ireland. And when he returns next month, what is that? When you coming back?
Like the 11th, I think.
Probably like the second after you come back, a few days after you're back. 5 days or so, we'll put together another show. And I don't know what the topic's going to be yet, but we'll take you down memory lane again. Another Philly sports history, the old school.
Yep.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Have a great night, everybody. Go Sixers.
Go Sixers.